Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
I have a silk chadar in the second drawer, which you can kindly give me. Today is December the 28th. Okay. So today I'm going to reply to or comment on a blog posting by His Holiness Dhanurdhara Swami, which was posted 2 days ago on December the 26th, 2016, entitled Moral Diversity, Book Banning and the Conservative Liberal Polemic in ISKCON. It concerns a book that I published under the title Women, Masters and Mothers. It is now renamed Mothers and Masters. Before I get into this, I should state that I have a long-standing, cordial relationship, cordial, friendly, and appreciative, respectful relationship with Dhanurdhara Swami. Although we haven't had much interaction with each other, but it's always been pretty good. There's been mutual respect there. This blog posting it's a mixture of praise of the book, mixed with some bashing, and I'm going to respond mostly to the bashing. I appreciate that he's taking the trouble to critique the book. He's not afraid to do so in a negative way. So I appreciate that, because there is within our movement at the present time some idea going around that you should only praise others, don't criticize. So I don't agree with that. There should be criticism also, for otherwise everything just becomes mushy and wishy-washy. So I appreciate that he's had the boldness to comment, because mostly our leaders don't comment on anything unless it's politically safe to do so. It's not politically safe to comment on this book. Because he doesn't identify himself as a leader, but he is, in which I'll read his critique. But he is a leader in as much as he is looked up to, and rightfully so, as a spiritual leader. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean that I agree with everything he says or does, but I have to appreciate that he's a sannyasi of long standing without any institutional backing for many years. He's not only maintained his sannyas, but has flourished as a preacher. So, kudos to him for that. I'm going to reply. His critique is his take on this book, and he wants to extend that critique of the book to a whole critique of the conservative liberal polemic in ISKCON, and I'm going to reply with what is my opinion of his opinion. We're not supposed to engage in eating, sleeping, mating, or defending, at least on the bodily platform, but, I have made a statement, or a series of statements in this book, and it's coming under some criticism, so I should defend it, and it's not just, my opinion, your opinion, but we want to find out or bring out what is the truth and what is the best thing for everyone. It's not just that, no one should say anything wrong about me or about what I've written, but I've taken a position. Now it's come under attack. and I seek to defend that position. It's not just a personal thing, but we're discussing the whole direction of the Krishna consciousness movement, which is not a small thing, because this movement is supposed to save the world from its degradation. That's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, that's Srila Prabhupada's mission. That's actually the major subject of this book. In one sense, the role of women, which does take up a major part of the book, and the book is titled after that. In one sense, that's a sub-theme to the main theme of the book, which is dealt with as the first 1/3 or so of the book is about the direction of the Krishna consciousness movement. What is the direction of our movement? The social direction. Srila Prabhupada made it very clear that he wanted to establish Varnashram Dharma. We as a movement have not been serious about that and have until recently been officially, practically opposed to that. That's a major problem for our movement if we don't follow Prabhupada's direction on that. So these are important issues. Very important. If we as a movement want to please Prabhupada, we have to follow what he says, or at least attempt to do so. And my thesis in this book is that we're not doing so. And we should do so. Now, in going, this will probably be quite a fairly long talk, and I'll be going over points that I've gone over before many times from the book, in response to criticisms. Well, that's the way it is. It's just like Prabhupada, he would speak on various points again and again and again, because people would raise them again and again and again. Now, as soon as I say just like Prabhupada, say, "Oh, you're imitating Prabhupada." No, it's we have to follow his example. Srila Prabhupada preached Krishna consciousness. There were repeated objections to what he was teaching, and he would repeatedly reply to them. Now, my first objection, or one overwhelming objection here, is that Dhanurdhara Swami doesn't actually quote my book at all, or anything from Guru, Sadhu or Shastra. The only thing he quotes, and that's the basis of his whole critique, is some university professor. So in my humble opinion, this is a lot of the problem that our movement is facing, that we give so much importance to in social analysis or whatever. We give a lot of importance to what some university professors say. Well, what about Vyasadeva? What about our acharyas? What about Prabhupada? Dhanurdhara Swami he's giving some social critique, but with no direct reference to Prabhupada. I'll read the first. I'll read most. I plan to read most of what is written here. I recently started to write a review of a book that was banned in ISKCON, but my book review soon morphed into something else, a study of moral diversity as a template to bridge the gap between the societies and liberal wings. Okay, but after reading the whole article, I don't see anything that suggests how the gap can be bridged, accepting that there are conservative and liberal wings. Well, that is also, we can say that within ISKCON there are conservative and liberal wings, but we should be a little careful not to box everyone up too much into these categories. Someone may be what you call conservative in one way and liberal in another way. It's a very broad brush to paint everything with. he analyzes the differences between, or rather he takes one professor's analysis of the differences between conservatives and liberals, but he doesn't actually offer any practical direction to bridge the divide. Maybe we should ask first of all why there is such a divide. Prabhupada's instructions are there for everyone to see. Isn't it that we as a movement should ascertain what Srila Prabhupada wanted and work unitedly? Why is this? First of all, why is there this a divide, a cultural divide in our movement? That should be maybe considered first. Okay, continuing reading what Dhanurdhara Swami wrote. 3 months ago I was included as a receiver to a flurry of impassioned but reasonably well-reasoned protest letters from the disciples of Bhakti Vikasa Swami to a long list of ISKCON leaders arguing that it was improper for the GBC to ban their Guru's book, Women Masters or Mothers. Impassioned, they were, I guess they were impassioned. We are after all persons, and the way that the GBC banned the book, if you want to read about it all, the correspondence I had with the GBC EC, Executive Committee, about that, goes to show it was pretty mean the way the GBC dealt with me. So it's not surprising if people become impassioned about it. But apart from that, we should feel about all this. Why not be impassioned? We're discussing about Srila Prabhupada's movement. This is our life. It's our service to Prabhupada. Okay, continuing with Dhanurdhara Swami. I was a little annoyed at first. I'm not an ISKCON leader. Yeah, officially he's not an ISKCON leader. And I hadn't read or seen the book or even had an interest to do so. But as I received letter after letter, my interest was piqued to find out why this book was such a controversy. I processed it to the writer of the next letter I received. I am not an ISKCON leader, nor even technically an ISKCON, and I have not even read the book. If you choose to continually copy me on your complaints, at least send me a copy of the book. And she did. In a sense, whether I agreed with the author's opinion or not, I couldn't fathom why the book should be banned. It was mostly quotes from Srila Prabhupada espousing the more traditional view of the role of women in society, and the author gave many reasonable and well-argued supporting arguments. The cover was too provocative. I wonder what that means, too provocative. It definitely was provocative. Too provocative? Well, that's a value judgment, an opinion. Provocative covers are meant to arouse interest. It certainly aroused interest. How about we have on the cover of Srila Prabhupada's 5th canto, Kali with her breasts showing, decapitating those dacoits who wanted to kill Dhanurdhara. That's a pretty provocative cover. BBT book. What about Nrsimhadev ripping Hiranyakashipu to pieces? That's on the cover of another BBT book. Approved by Prabhupada. Yeah. And what about, there's another one which came out after Srila Prabhupada departed, but was widely distributed all over the world. A figure of a man with a cow's head preparing to decapitate a cow with a man's head. I mean, this is provocative. Too provocative? What's too provocative? Who will say? And some parts were too polemical, some bordering on the pejorative. Yeah, there's a problem with it. It's like saying that you shouldn't criticize others. Well, by criticizing By saying that, you're criticizing them. So if you're saying bordering on the pejorative, then it's also a kind of pejorative. Anyway, especially in discussing a topic with such a history of abuse. But I just couldn't justify the ban, and neither could the GPC. This is an important point here, discussing a topic with such a history of abuse. So I should have taken it more easy. Yeah, the history or the background of how this book came to be written has got a lot to do with this response to the history of abuse of women within ISKCON. The response to the abuse has been similar to that of the Karmis. Feminism. Empower women. Treat them as equals. Give them equal roles. Women's rights. So that's a lot of what I'm writing about, that our movement's gone off track. It's gone towards some kind of egalitarianism, if you want to bring in the conservative, liberal thing, the cultural Marxism. So how we have responded to that abuse? Well, we could have said, okay, let's get our act. We really need to get our act together and have a social model that Srila Prabhupada gave us. Responsible men divided into 4 divisions: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and women taking the roles as assistants to their husbands, respect of women, respect but also socially different and subordinate role. So we could have responded in that way, but we didn't. Okay, back to Dhanurdhara Swami, what he says. The GBC soon rescinded their restrictions, but I still felt that this was a book and a subject matter that sorely needed to be addressed. I initially decided to write a careful book review addressing in depth the various issues and arguments raised, but when I realized what that would entail, I hesitated. I would not only have to deal elaborately with each or many of the book's points, either defending or refuting them, but I would also risk getting drawn into a long and fruitless debate with people entrenched in their views, an exercise I definitely had no interest in or time to initiate. I decided that it would be better just to highlight the core issue and address the controversy in a more general way. Commenting on this, commenting in a general way, what we're left with is largely nothing but Dhanurdhara Swami's opinions. I'm not saying his opinions don't have any basis, but he doesn't, in other words, in trying to just present a synopsis, he hasn't quoted from the book, and we get statements both, I felt this book was a subject matter that sorely needed to be addressed. Okay, so that's a praising statement, and then we'll find also, as we go through his article, statements where he adversely criticizes me, but it's just because he doesn't provide any quotes from the book, then it just comes off as his opinion about it, which is a bit disappointing considering that Dhanurdhara Swami is very learned and absorbed in Shastra, and a very thoughtful devotee, thoughtful in the sense that he does a lot of writing about Krishna consciousness, mostly on his blog. He's a deep person, deep devotee. So, but I find that this review is atypical of him, and I'd be happy to discuss with him, but we have to discuss on the basis of the book rather than just some general statements about it. To highlight the core issue, what is the core issue? It seems that he thinks that the core issue is moral diversity. He'll get to that. That's as he sees it. In other words, he seems to see that the issue is more about the way I come over as to the actual issues. What I get from his essay is that he's concerned more with how people will feel and respond and not be alienated by it. But what is the core issue? The core issue of the book is the whole social direction of our movement, which he doesn't address that at all. He writes about a long and fruitless debate with people entrenched in their views, which suggests, as he does several times throughout the article, that myself or my followers, those who support me on issues concerned with this book, are just unreasonably opinionated or fanatics, people who are entrenched in their views, that we're not willing to have a reasonable discussion. So there's a bit of talking about pejoratives. Well, insinuation is there. He may not have been conscious or intended it that way. Okay, continuing Dhanurdhara Swami's article. While pondering how to tackle the issue, I came across a relevant lecture by Jonathan Haidt. I'm not sure if that's how to pronounce the name. NUU, New York University, professor of sociology, entitled The Moral Roots of Conservatives and Liberals. I thought his lecture neutrally addressed the core principles at the root of the conservative-liberal dichotomy, so I became inspired as a contribution to this discussion to summarize his study, apply his thesis to the mother's-master's dichotomy, and then suggest where Maharaj's otherwise thoughtful social analysis based on Srila Prabhupada's teachings fell short. In his lecture, Professor Haidt described his comprehensive cross-cultural study of what constitutes the moral mind. He found that there are 5 universal qualities that form the basis of moral diversity, an analysis of morality that perfectly conceptualize what we espouse in our tradition. This is highly speculative. What is the moral? What does he mean by the moral mind? What's his conception of morals? Most people in the world think that it's moral to treat humans well, but not animals, for instance. We can just kill the animal. It doesn't come within their morality, for instance. So he's come up with this analysis or this template for analyzing moral diversity. But then some other scholar will come along and say, no, this doesn't fit properly, and come up with some other. Otherwise, someone could come and analyze ISKCON's present social divide according to behavioral psychology or Marxist theory. But that's not the way that we're taught to approach issues. We're taught by Srila Prabhupada to approach issues according to Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, which unfortunately in his whole essay Dhanurdhara Swami hasn't referred to at all. Actually, there's no morality without Krishna consciousness. Actual morality means to act as Krishna wants. In one of the points, I'm not going to read through all this stuff from Professor Haidt because I'm underwhelmed by his whole the whole presentation that he gives, and even the fact that so much importance is being given to it. One of his points: a moral person makes judgments and deals with others free from arbitrary discrimination, the golden rule. But why should we accept that? We judge according to Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. Arbitrary discrimination? Well, we do discriminate. We discriminate according to Shastra. Some people are demons, according to Shastra. Some people are deluded and are in Maya. So it's not that we just, this new agey idea that we just non-judgmental, we just deal with people, we basically think that everyone's good and we take them on that basis. That's not our what we've learned. Now we can be open to others and give them a fair chance to present Krishna consciousness to them, and don't presume that they're wrong or they're bad, but we as preachers are supposed to see that we are in a better position than others by the grace of Srila Prabhupada. Okay, I won't get into that in depth. I did discuss this about non-judgmentalism in that book on speaking strongly in Srila Prabhupada's person, speaking strongly in Srila Prabhupada's service. I'll skip some bits of this. Professor Veit felt the need to explain how in-group loyalty, for which liberals have much less regard than conservatives, is also an important moral quality. That's debatable. Although liberals talk about individualism and free speech and all this, but they have very strong in-group loyalty. If you don't agree with them, they become ferocious. If you're not in their group, if you disagree with them, they can practically go to any lengths. They won't listen to. They talk about free speech, but they don't. They only allow the free speech if you agree with them. So, and they come together as a group to protest, and they're very active. They make groups. They make political groupings, social groupings. They come together and they make protests. So I think that's debatable. Then I'll skip some of this. Okay. Quoting Professor Haidt again from Dhanurdhara Swami's paper. Conservatives speak for the institutions and traditions and seek order even at the cost of those at the bottom. Okay, Dhanurdhara Swami says Professor Haidt cannot by any means be pigeonholed as a conservative. Okay, I'm being pigeonholed as a conservative. And he says that conservatives speak for the institutions and traditions and seek order even at the cost of those at the bottom. Okay, so now I'm being pigeonholed as a conservative, and the point which he'll make more clear later on in this essay, Dhanurdhara Swami says, not much concerned about people, the cost of those at the bottom. But Varnashram doesn't do that. Varnashram is a non-exploitive society. Maybe mundane conservatives don't care for those at the bottom. But it might, to the modern way of thinking, Varnashram is wrong because it's hierarchical. Some people are on the top and some people are on the bottom. Some people have more privilege than others. That's a fact. So according to modern egalitarian thinking, Varnashram is, well, it's conservative and it's exploitive. But this whole critique that Dhanurdhara Swami is doing, it has very little relevance to Varnashram because Varnashram isn't exploitive. It is hierarchical, but it's not exploitive. I'm going to read from Women, Masters and Mothers, retitled as Mothers and Masters. This is from the preface, page 12. About Varnashram Dharma is not exploitive. It's not seeking order even at the cost of those at the bottom. Srila Prabhupada, now I'm reading now from the preface of Mothers and Masters. Srila Prabhupada's mission was Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu, let everyone be happy. I'm quoting here from a lecture of Srila Prabhupada. It's a Vedic aphorism. To educate people how to be happy in this lifetime by practicing Krishna consciousness within Varnashram Dharma and to thus prepare in the best possible way for the next life. To this end, Srila Prabhupada wanted that his disciples show an ideal example to the world by establishing Krishna conscious communities wherein everyone performs his prescribed role. For instance, and importantly, that men are really men and women are clearly women by dress, behavior and temperament. Moreover, protected women are an auspicious source of energy to man. This is quoting from Bhagavatam purport. Being naturally motherly and affectionate, shy and chaste, and ensuring that their children are healthy and bright. Consequently, the men actually become inspired to assume responsibility for protecting and providing. All happily cooperating together, they live on the lap of nature depending on Krishna's bounty. Mothers and Masters is the first publication to present a multifaceted case for the traditional approach to Krishna consciousness, whereby everyone can be happy in the Vedic way as described by Srila Prabhupada. So this model in which conservatives are supposed to be seeking order even at the cost of those at the bottom is inapplicable to what I've described in the book. So, continuing Dhanurdhara Swami's critique, he, this Professor Haidt, concludes that both conservatives and liberals have something substantial to contribute, and that the most highly evolved people are those who are morally diverse, as represented in his template for the moral mind. Okay, well, even if we accept his analysis, it's only analytical. What's the solution? Dhanurdhara Swami opened this by saying he's giving a study of moral diversity as a template to bridge the gap between the society's conservative and liberal wings. But what's the practical thing to bridge the gap? There's an analysis. You can just say that the most highly evolved people, okay, well, what do you do with all the unevolved people like myself, I presume? What's the gap bridger? Continuing Dhanurdhara Swami. What I find most helpful in Professor Haidt's discussion is that it provides a template to help reconcile Srila Prabhupada's apparently contradictory social viewpoint, his strong affinity for the social traditions of India in contrast to his sometimes liberal outlook toward their application, especially in terms of his statements about women. By the way, in terms of statements about women, I was actually quite reticent in I didn't harbor on about many of the statements that Srila Prabhupada gave about, for instance, women being less intelligent than men, about being 9 times more lusty. The understanding of a woman can never be that on the level of a man. I didn't get into that at all. Oh, and there's that famous one, a woman likes a man who is very expert at rape. I didn't get into that at all. So if there's some thesis that I'm somehow trying to be women bashing by this book, well, if I wanted to bash by using Prabhupada's statements, I could have brought in much more, but that wasn't my purpose. I'm not saying Dhanurdhara Swami said that, although it sometimes seems to be implied in what he says. Bhakti Vikasa Swami tries to reconcile Srila Prabhupada's conservative statements with his liberal statements in regard to women in ISKCON by explaining that the more liberal statements were only made initially to encourage people in devotional service, but that now as the movement has matured, Srila Prabhupada would certainly have insisted that all women in ISKCON should be more or less limited to domestic roles and strictly follow traditional behavior and etiquette. Well, I didn't say that. I must respectfully submit that I didn't say that Prabhupada would certainly insist that all women in ISKCON should be more or less limited to domestic and social roles. Here, I'm going to read one statement. I didn't have time to go through the whole book tonight. I can't remember everything I wrote. But here's a quotation. Although in emergencies anything can be done, if we are to demonstrate to the world that Varnashram Dharma is the most stable, satisfying and enlightened form of social organization, then we shall have to train our men as responsible husbands and fathers and our women as devoted wives and affectionate mothers. Trying to cast everyone into male roles simply underlines our failure to institute Varnashram Dharma and our unwillingness to reverse this trend. We cannot browbeat lady devotees to adopt Stri Dharma, and to attempt to do so would likely result in offences. Yet, if we are to establish that traditional household roles for women, although scorned by feminists, are indeed what Krishna has prescribed for them and is what works best for them and for the world, then first we as a society will have to understand and emphasize this point. We shall also have to praise and adore chaste women as Shastra teaches us to do, rather than simply neglect them. So that's to say that I said that Srila Prabhupada would certainly have insisted that all women in ISKCON should be more or less limited to domestic roles. Show me the quote. I don't find that. I say I don't. I make a case for accepting the order that Prabhupada gave us to establish Varnashram. I make a case for that. I don't say that I'm insisting that everyone has to take it up fully. That's not very practical. The problem is that unless we take up the social model that Prabhupada gave, which Krishna gave, then we have to continue working according to the model of the whole society around us, which is the whole world to much extent is following the Western model. And of course the Western model, and of course that's a very broad thing to say, because even within the West there are so many different cultural subgroups. But unless we accept the challenge that Prabhupada gave us to introduce Varnashram Dharma, then we simply have to act as part of the present society. And there are problems with that, because Prabhupada, he analyzed, according to Shastra, that the society is demoniac. And it's not conducive for practicing Krishna consciousness. Dhanurdhara Swami, as many others do, say, well look, we're preaching in the world, look what the world's like, we have to adjust to it. Okay, accept it. But we also, we just can't come in and bash people over the head immediately and say, okay, immediately you change and become a Vedic person, whatever that means exactly. But we have to, the whole outlook on life has to change. We need has to change. We need a society that is organized as Krishna organizes it, based on self-realization rather than gross sense gratification. Otherwise, what are we going to do? We have a major problem in ISKCON, and we're so inured to it that we think that it's just normal, that we preach, we bring people in, they go along for some time and then they fall down. It's called the ISKCON tube. You come in, you go along for some time and then you fall out the other end. It's a major problem, and we've become inured to the fact that our devotees marry, they divorce, they remarry. I've addressed all this in the book. What's your solution to this, Dhanurdhara Maharaj? How do you propose to address this problem? Well, Prabhupada already gave it. It's a tough thing to institute, no doubt, but it is something as Prabhupada himself, in the beginning he was very liberal. I make the case. He was very, very liberal. If you see San Francisco, 1967, Srila Prabhupada among the hippies, very, very liberal, but gradually he introduced more rules and regulations. And although he had spoken of the need to introduce Varnashram even before he came to the West, he spoke about it increasingly from about 1974 onwards, seeing that Grihastas were falling down, sannyasis were falling down, devotees in general, Brahmins were falling down. So at least I'm bringing up this discussion. What are you going to, what's your solution to this? Do you have any solution, or just we go along with life as it is? It's not very satisfactory. I prefer to see that Srila Prabhupada said both things because he was morally diverse. He saw that, although actually in his writings and which Prabhupada gave most authority to, his books, we'll find, as Shastra said, because it's commentaries on Shastra, then he outlines the traditional rules. He also says, Sarvopadi vinir muktam taparadvena nirmalam, one has to be free of mundane upadis, designations. I've addressed this all in the book. That as long as we are in this material world, in material consciousness, we can't artificially try to act on a platform that we're not on. That will cause fall down. He saw the need to institute the tradition of Varnashram with its social mores, but he also had a strong sense of care and justice. Again, it suggests that Varnashram lacks, or those who are promoting Varnashram, they lack a sense of care and justice, or a strong sense of care and justice. It's a bit unfair here, in my humble opinion. He balanced his sense of the ideal with a concern to encourage and empower his female disciples, or anyone for that matter, with a strong consideration for who they were now in the moment. Okay, but he also gave an understanding that who they were now in the moment is not the way they should be. They need to change. The whole society needs to change. It's the new agey thing of just accept people as they are, take them as they are. Okay, take them as they are, but we're trying to mold people also. Social engineering, if you like. Vaishnava, who are they in the moment? Vaishnava members of an ancient tradition but born in a modern milieu. And it's obvious for me that he would do the same today out of a similar sense of compassion and fairness, and also for the fact that few in the first world would come to Krishna consciousness if purda, with the face of our preaching. That's also debatable. Srila Prabhupada said that millions would join our farms if we do have a social alternative, if we can demonstrate how Krishna consciousness with its attendant social system, it's on it. That's the challenge that Prabhupada gave us, to give a positive alternative. We haven't done it. It's also debatable that people wouldn't join us if we were to preach about Varnashram and try to demonstrate it, because we see that we're told that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, and I'm not making a case for Islam here, but they are socially very conservative, you could say, and churches that give restrictions, they seem to be growing because people have something to join. Otherwise, why join a church if it doesn't really teach you anything, or make any demands on you? I've given a link in the book to an essay by Krishna Kirti Prabhu about this, about not preaching this in the West. It's the implication seems to be that we can't present such things in the West. I wrote, we as Srila Prabhupada's followers, this is page 44, are duty-bound to accept the challenge to demonstrate Varnashram Dharma as a way of living on our own terms, or rather Krishna's terms, rejecting those dictated by predatory corporations and politicians. Nor is it impossible to present to people who are at least somewhat open-minded about traditional social roles that, for instance, men and women have different mentalities and different needs, or that women should care for their children full-time and consequently must in many ways be dependent upon their husband. This is how Srila Prabhupada preached about these things. Why can't we do the same? It's not impossible to preach all this. Of course, Dhanurdhara Swami doesn't say it is impossible to do so, but doesn't seem to take into account that Srila Prabhupada himself preached about these things in America to non-devotees. Bhakti Vikasa Swami argues, continuing Dhanurdhara Swami's writing, argues that if we had senior women who held to the most traditional line of women's development and temples organized strictly according to these same strictures, our preaching would be more successful. I think this points out, I just discussed a little bit about that. I think this points out a weakness of Maharaj's presentation, that his preaching has not been on the front lines of the first world, and that he thus has only a limited realization of the deep sincerity and mindset of the people whom preachers in the West confront. For his view to have credibility, he or his followers would have to lead the way and show others how to impact the first world with his tone and presentation. Regarding my tone and presentation in this book, as has been many times pointed out, Srila Prabhupada's books also, they have statements therein which are highly unacceptable, it seems, or are said to be highly unacceptable to many people in the modern world. For instance, right in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada writes in one purport that women are on the level of children, they shouldn't be given independence. And throughout his books we find such statements. So you could, from reading Prabhupada's books, you might presume that a reader might presume that he's misogynistic. So the same complaints that are made about this book could be made about Prabhupada's books. But then you may say, well then Prabhupada, he dealt with people differently. He didn't he didn't force people to accept this. Well, maybe you should look at the way I behave also. I'll get back to that later. There's another accusation against me. When you talk about the West, by the way, what are we talking about? The mindset is very different. And for instance, even within the United States, there's a very palpable, and the very point of this Professor Haidt is that there is a cultural divide. So maybe if we were preaching among the people who, probably most of those who elected the new American, or to be American president. Now, I'm not making a case for Donald Trump, but I'm just saying that there are literally millions of people in America with what we could call a more conservative outlook. So if you say the West, how appealing to what do you mean by the West? Because the West, America itself is very much culturally divided, and many of them are on what I would say conservative, although I don't identify myself with that conservatism, and I don't think our devotees should identify themselves with that liberalism either. But in America, people, and what's the overall outlook of people, say, in Italy or Russia? You could all call it the West. My life I spent most of this life in India, but that doesn't bar me from studying Prabhupada's instructions for the world. These instructions are meant for the whole world, and presenting that this is what Prabhupada presented for the world. It's a good challenge. You could say I should be doing something in the West. Actually, I'm in India. I've dedicated most of this life here, and especially at the present time, I feel I require to be in India much of the time for overseeing Varnashram projects that some of my disciples are establishing here. In the West, I have what you could call two beachheads, centers overseen by some of my disciples, which are trying to bring in a more traditional approach to Krishna consciousness. Actually, when I say traditional approach, it's more like ISKCON was in the 1970s. I'm not talking about something what might be considered some draconian, neo-Vedic autocracy, but more like ISKCON was in the 70s, with a view to bringing in, at least as I grew up in ISKCON in the 70s, it was, we called, in London where I joined, we called women mother. They weren't giving class, for instance. They weren't leading kirtans and this and that. Was that all wrong? Maybe. Because some people may have that opinion. But anyway, I spent most of this life in India. I feel I have more responsibility here, but that doesn't mean that I can't comment on the West. Just as Prabhupada was in India, and he was commenting on the modern materialistic civilization. He hadn't been there at all, but through the eyes of Shastra he can do so. He may say again, I'm imitating Prabhupada. But Prabhupada told us to see everything through the eye of Shastra. So, I'm talking about those beachheads in the West. One major difficulty they're finding is that the ISKCON world today is so compromised in so many ways that if we try to bring even the basic standards, in many ways that Prabhupada wanted, they come under so much, they have to face so much opposition. But, okay, here's the challenge for you, Dhanurdhara Swami, my dear friend. I'm saying that not sarcastically. Why don't you do it? The instructions are there of Prabhupada to establish Varnashram. You can do it. You know the Western mentality very well. Do you think that it's impossible to do so? That we have to just deal with people in the neo-hippie mentality, or it's not possible to bring them to the varnashram standards of a division of society that Prabhupada wanted? So continuing, for his view, Dhanurdhara Swami says, for his, Bhakti Vikasa Swami's view, to have credibility, he or his followers would have to lead the way and show others how to impact the first world with his tone and presentation. Oh yeah, I already read that. Well, ISKCON today is hardly impacting the first world, so maybe you do need to think about something else. Okay, continuing. Srila Prabhupada was on the front lines and credited much of his success to his liberality. That's true. But after bringing Krishna consciousness to the West, what did he do next? He gradually increased his insistence on Varnashram Dharma, seeing that devotees, they weren't even, so many people he initiated, they didn't even maintain the basic 4 regulative principles. So Prabhupada, he was liberal, yes, liberal in bringing people in. But then if we're going to bring them up, then there has to be strictness and seriousness, and we can't just live all brothers and sisters, minimal discrimination between men and women on the basis that we're all spirit soul. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked for the last 50 years. Prabhupada was aware of that. Therefore he wanted to bring in society in which there's clear division, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, women. Okay. Those who have successfully followed suit as preachers in the first world also seem morally diverse. Successful preachers, okay, we can say they're successful. There are some devotees, obviously, who are successful in preaching in the West within the present paradigm of ISKCON, but we could say in another sense, the whole of our movement has not been a success in the West, inasmuch as we haven't maintained the momentum that we had when Prabhupada was here, and we haven't introduced Varnashram Dharma. So that's true all over the world. How can we say our movement's successful if we don't do what Prabhupada said? So you may say that some devotees are successful in bringing people in the present circumstances. Very good. I really don't want to undermine their great sacrifice and their dedication and their sincerity and their success in doing so. But how are we to measure the success? By our ability to bring a few Western people every year into Krishna consciousness, or is our success going to be millions will join our farms? Prabhupada spoke about that. We haven't pursued this at all. How successful are we at not just bringing people in, but keeping them in communicating to them Srila Prabhupada's vision? These are all parts of success. That is not to say that Srila Prabhupada's presentations and expectations then, or what he would have demanded now, were liberal or divorced from the tradition. They were not, but they were tempered or relevantly applied out of fairness to the times in which people were living and out of compassion for their souls. Again, it implies that I lack compassion for the souls. Okay. I appreciate, then he goes on. I appreciate many of the points in Maharaj's book about the relevance of the traditional views of Indian culture. It's actually Vedic culture, universal culture, Krishna's culture, especially its promotion of the role of mothers, as would many of the senior women in ISKCON whom he calls suffragettes. This word suffragette means this was the name given to women in England at the turn of the 19th, 20th, cusp of the 19th and 20th century, who took political action to secure the vote for women. So I'm actually quoted a book by scholars Bryant and someone else, I don't remember her name, in which they use this term, tongue-in-cheek but approvingly, to state that there is a suffragette movement within ISKCON. In other words, there is a political feminist movement within ISKCON. They said it in an approving way. So I used this term, I adopted it from them. In other words, even outside or semi-outside observers can see that women within our movement have taken to political action to try to bring about, and have done to a great extent, bring about roles which are more in line with the modern egalitarian ideas than they are with Krishna's Vedic culture, which Srila Prabhupada wanted us to introduce. He didn't personally introduce it, but he said he wanted to introduce it. So Srila Prabhupada did want to introduce. He said 50% of my work is not done in not introducing Varnashram. So he, Dhanurdhara Swami continues, talking about myself, has a number of legitimate concerns and important things to say, but I don't think drawing sharp lines or seeing the issue in black and white is the wholesome or realized approach that Srila Prabhupada espoused. Srila Prabhupada is able to preach a strong affinity for the tradition without losing sight of its purpose, to inspire people in Krishna consciousness through a practical application of his teachings, often in accordance with time, place, and circumstance. Yeah, it's pretty, pretty pugilistic, punching me out there. Strong criticism is saying that I'm, in a roundabout way, saying that I'm unwholesome and unrealized. Have lost sight of the purpose of that I've lost sight of the purpose of the tradition. This time, place, and circumstance. Yeah, how long do we practice Krishna consciousness and preach it in terms of time, place, and circumstance? Obviously, preaching will always be according to time, place, and circumstance. But again, I'm saying it again and again and again, Srila Prabhupada did want us to introduce something else also. So we have to find the ways and means we preach to people and show them another role. We give them Prabhupada's books in which it says this society is demoniac. It's misleading. It's taking us to hell. It is hell. And then we show them the alternative. And then we can preach about it. But unless we know what the goal is to establish that society, then how are we even going to think about showing the positive alternative? There's a positive alternative, not a negative alternative. And this book is required because the way ISKCON is today, many of our devotees, they have no idea that Prabhupada had this idea of introducing Varnashram. And he had no idea of making a cultural revolution. So then we're always Srila Prabhupada preaching an emergency situation. We're always going to be in an emergency and take that as normal. We always catering to the emergency rather than setting up our own alternative. Okay, continuing, Dhanurdhara Swami. At the end of last summer, one incident highlighted to me the necessity for Bhakti Vikasa Swami to adjust his presentation in a practical way. When I am in New York, I regularly visit the Harinam Sankirtan at Union Square. And again, what Dhanurdhara Swami is writing here is based on what he gets from the book. And but he's also, citing how Prabhupada practically behaved. Well, okay, if you read Prabhupada's books, you will get a very, what you might be considered a draconian outlook. But then you see Prabhupada, how he actually behaved and dealt with people. So, did you see how I behave and deal with people? It's not necessarily in as harsh a way as you might think. Anyway, Dhanurdhara Swami says, while I am in New York, I regularly visit the Harinam Sankirtan at Union Square, and one day I noticed that a young woman born in the movement had joined the chanting group. She had been there for several months participating in kirtan and book distribution, and was about to return home, perhaps to attend college. Ram Rai, an exemplary Vaishnava and strict brahmachari, turned to me and glorified her, expressing how much her contribution would be missed. He described her as talented, dedicated and chaste, and I could tell that she conducted herself in an exemplary manner. At the time I was reading Bhakti Vikasa Swami's book, and the thought came to me how he might castigate her parents for granting the woman even this little non-varnashram independence, when in fact her parents, who are strict devotees, were just being practical and morally diverse. Well, you presume that, or you think that I might just get really heavy with her parents, but is there any record of me doing so? You might get the same idea from Prabhupada's books, that he would really get on the, and actually he did get on the case of people a lot personally also. But it's really assuming a lot, which is not necessarily in accord with the reality of how I actually deal with people. I don't go around to the club bashing people on the head and saying, Varnashram, Varnashram. I'm not so unpragmatic, I hope. Okay, continuing. Dhanurdhara Swami says, they had raised their child with Krishna conscious values, with what appeared to be reasonable boundaries, and as dedicated and strict devotees, had set an example for her to follow. Out of concerns for their daughter's situation and needs, they had engaged her in practical devotional service. What in the world could possibly be wrong with that? Wasn't that in fact Srila Prabhupada's mood? One thing is, I don't say that women shouldn't preach. In fact, this whole article began with him, Dhanurdhara Swami, getting a letter from a female disciple of mine so she was preaching via the internet. But generally I say that men should preach to men and women should preach to women. It just makes sense. In a public setting, the Harinam Sankirtan, I don't say women shouldn't go on Harinam, whatever. So, I don't say they shouldn't go on book distribution. It's presuming a lot about me. Wasn't that in fact Srila Prabhupada's mood, to engage everyone? Yeah, but he had a specific format that he wanted to engage them in. And that is Varnashram. I'm saying it again and again and again because Dhanurdhara Swami here is again and again and again making various insinuations which I'm replying to. So what about all the quotes by Srila Prabhupada describing Varnashram and its traditionalist values? Yeah, what about them? That's what I'm saying. The book's full of it. What about them? What is our movement doing about it? What are you doing about it? If that's what Srila Prabhupada wanted, what do you mean if that's what Srila Prabhupada wanted? It's clear that he did want it. Why is there any question about it? If that's what Srila Prabhupada wanted, then by all means his followers should take up the service to implement it and show others its value. Yes, very good. Do it, please. Sorry if I feel if I'm coming across as being very heavy here, but this is a very heavy thing. We as a movement, just like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's followers, Prabhupada said, they neglected his order to preach and therefore they became asar, useless. So if we neglect Prabhupada's orders to establish Varnashram, we become asar, useless. Only as long as they don't, Dhanurdhara Swami says, in trying to implement it, lose their heart and kick too many good, sincere Krishna-conscious women aside. We shouldn't kick aside even any good, sincere Krishna-conscious woman, or kick aside anyone. Again, it's insinuations that I've lost my heart. It's insinuating that I've lost my heart, and by this presentation I'm going to be kicking people away. I reject that. I say if you read this book, and you will accept, as Dhanurdhara Swami has said, that there are important things to say there. For instance, Dhanurdhara Swami says he has a number of legitimate concerns and important things to say. Okay, what else did Dhanurdhara Swami say? It was mostly quotes espousing the more traditional view of the role of women in society, and the author gave many reasonable and well-argued supporting arguments. So that, okay, if you think that the book is imbalanced or whatever, could you give some practical suggestion how to present it? How to present to the Vaishnava society that our movement is gone toward a non-Vedic, non-Shastric, feministic, egalitarian, materialistic social model? How do you present it in a way that says, well, actually everyone's nice and everything's wonderful and love, peace, and we're ignoring Prabhupada's instructions? How do you do that? How do you get the point across? I mean, we should be yelling and screaming, and Prabhupada gave that example. Someone's flying a kite at the edge of the cliff. Excuse me, you have to yell at him. Watch out! You're in trouble. So, almost. Bhakti Vikasa is an excellent writer and a substantial preacher in ISKCON. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm going to say the same thing about yourself. His voice for conservative values is an important one, and he does have a point. There are radical voices in the modern world that don't represent Srila Prabhupada and whose influence in ISKCON is unwanted. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. The influence within ISKCON of radical voices in the modern world that don't represent Srila Prabhupada. You see, he himself is saying it. And people do need to be educated in the value of tradition and what Srila Prabhupada wanted. Yes. I just think that Maharaj would be more successful if his vision were a bit more morally diverse, and he showed the fairness, compassion and practicality that Srila Prabhupada demonstrated in spreading this Krishna conscious movement. It's actually very vague. He hasn't shown that I'm lacking in fairness, compassion and practicality. It's just an accusation practically. So, I came across or sent something on the internet from a Facebook, discussion, comments, in which someone had written, discussing about this article of Dhanurdhara Swami. Someone had written that the book was banned, but then the GBC unbanned it after I removed comments supporting the Taliban. Oh, it's amazing. It's just amazing how misinformed, this is not uninformed, this is misinformed people can be. And then they put it on the internet without checking their facts, as if it is a fact. The book was unbanned by the GBC, according to the GBC, because they erroneously banned it. And according to one of the GBC members, the one who was behind the ban and wants it banned, it's not a ban. You're not allowed to sell it in ISKCON centers, but it's not banned. Somehow or other. Because it's not a total ban, it's not banned. It's called, in George Orwell's language, double speak. But There was never any protest about the book supporting the Taliban, because there is nothing in the book supporting the Taliban. So to say that the GBC allowed the book to be sold or unbanned it because I removed the statements about supporting the Taliban, I mean, this is just absolute speculation. I wonder, what is the future of our movement if this is the... we're trying to have a serious discussion here. And just some... Even it was somewhat sympathetic comment, but it was just so divorced from any reality. Just a complete speculation. Hare Krishna. We really need to train Brahmins. That requires the Varnashram college. Real Brahmins who can... Anyway, Hare Krishna. Thank you for anyone who bothered to listen all this time. Sorry if I sound whiny or ranting. I apologize. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya vichapatitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah.